Wagner covers the White House for the Washington Post, and he joins us now from Washington, D.C. So, John, this 5-country trip will be the longest to the continent since President George H.W. Bush. What can we expect from the visit?
Well, that's right, 5 nations, and there are a number of issues on the agenda, but none really looms larger than what to do with North Korea and the nuclear threat. There are stops in Japan, South Korea, and China, all of which are meant to try to rally those nations around the president's plans as we know them. So a lot at stake in that regard. And a couple other multi-nation summits as well in Vietnam and the Philippines.
Well, the president, meanwhile, is traveling at a time when still looming over the administration are the indictments of the president's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, his deputy, Rick Gates, as well as the guilty plea of foreign advisor George Papadopoulos. Where do you expect special counsel Robert Mueller's probe to go from here?
Well, I mean, it's kind of hard to know given how much secrecy there really has been around his operations. But I think what we learned over the past week is that this has several tentacles. I mean, not only is he looking at allegations of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, but as you mentioned, he got into the finances of 2 former Trump aides, and there was a guilty plea secured from a third. And I think what the president probably has the most trepidation about is if Mueller gets into his finances and from his days before the White House. And I think this week showed that that's a possibility, given how aggressively he pursued Manafort and Gates.
On Thursday, the president called the GOP's new tax plan a, quote, big, beautiful Christmas present for the country. Is Christmas a realistic timeline for such a major overhaul?
There are a lot of people that think that is highly ambitious and perhaps not realistic. I think if you talk to some Republicans on the Hill, they'll even privately acknowledge that. And I don't think they're quite as concerned as the president with getting it done by Christmas. They feel a tremendous amount of pressure to deliver on a tax plan for their own purposes of running for re-election next year. But I don't know that having it done by the end of the year undercuts that. If they were to get it done early next year, they'd still have something to tout.
And what are some of the sticking points, John, that you think that'll be challenging for Republicans to try to overcome?
Well, really the whole larger frame is whether this truly is something that helps the middle class. In order to try to at least pay for part of this, there are a number of measures that have been taken, including rolling back now the state and local tax deductions. And that's an example of something that will actually hurt some middle-class taxpayers, depending on in which state you live. So there are a lot of gives and takes in here, and I think it's going to take a little while to sort out truly the winners and losers. And there will be Republicans in states where there are some losers, and the key will be doing something to keep them on board or bring them on board.
So against the backdrop of all of this, there is a new book, The Last Republicans, and in it Presidents George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush had some harsh words for President Trump, with Bush 43 saying, quote, this guy doesn't know what it means to be president. And Bush 41 even went so far as to call President Trump a, quote, blowhard. What do their criticisms say about the state of the Republican Party?
Well, I think it's less surprising that they think these things, and more surprising that they actually said them in a way that they knew would become public. But both of the Bushes, particularly the elder Bush, it was a very different kind of Republican than Donald Trump. They talk about in the book, having a respect for humility and being collaborative, and those are, I think, attributes that few would argue are in large supply with the current president.
All right. We continue to see what other excerpts are released from that. John Wagner, thank you so much, John, for your time. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me.